Once a grand and beautiful mansion, the house had seen better days. Its walls were cracked and peeling, its windows boarded up. The garden that once bloomed with flowers was now overgrown with weeds and thorny vines. It was an ominous sight, but the couple didn't let that deter them. They had been searching for their dream home for years, and this one seemed perfect. The real estate agent had warned them about the dark history of the house, but the couple thought it was just a ploy to lower the price. They were convinced that they could fix up the place and make it their own. They were wrong. As soon as they entered the house, they felt an oppressive silence that hung in the air. The musty odor was overwhelming, and the couple couldn't help but feel like they were being watched. But they had come this far, and they weren't about to turn back now. As they explored the house, they began to notice strange things. Doors that had been closed moments before were now open. Objects were moving on their own, and shadows flickered across the walls. The couple tried to ignore these signs and convince themselves that it was just their imagination, but they knew deep down that something wasn't right. That night, as they lay in bed, they heard footsteps outside their bedroom door. The couple tried to rationalize it, thinking it might just be the sound of the old house settling, but they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The next day, the couple decided to do some research on the history of the house. They went to the local library and dug through old newspapers and records, trying to uncover the truth about the house's dark past. What they found was more horrifying than they could have imagined. The house had been the site of a gruesome murder in the early 1900s. The owner, a wealthy businessman, had killed his entire family and then turned the gun on himself. The couple realized too late that they had made a grave mistake by buying the house. They were trapped, with no escape from the malevolent presence that lingered within its walls. As the days went by, the couple's fear turned to terror as the malevolent presence grew stronger. They were taunted by ghostly apparitions, tortured by inexplicable events that seemed to defy all logic. The husband, Michael, was the first to crack. He became increasingly paranoid, convinced that the malevolent presence was out to get him. He began to see visions of the murdered family, their ghostly forms appearing to him in the middle of the night. He would wake up screaming, drenched in sweat, convinced that they were coming for him. His wife, Sarah, tried to reassure him, but it was no use. Michael's mental state deteriorated rapidly, and soon he was completely consumed by his fear. One night, Sarah woke up to find Michael gone. She searched the entire house, calling out his name, but there was no answer. Finally, she found him in the basement, huddled in a corner, his eyes wide with terror. He refused to speak, refused to tell her what had happened. All he would say was that they needed to leave the house, and they needed to leave now. Sarah tried to reason with him, but he was beyond reason. He had become a shell of his former self, consumed by fear and paranoia. As the days went by, Sarah began to notice something strange about the house. It was as if the malevolent presence was growing stronger, feeding off their fear and anxiety. She began to see things that she couldn't explain. Shadows moving on their own, objects flying off shelves, and strange whispers that seemed to be coming from nowhere. One day, Sarah decided that she couldn't take it anymore. She needed to get out of the house, but Michael was still too scared to leave. She knew that she couldn't leave him behind, but she also couldn't stay in the house any longer. Desperate for a solution, she turned to a local priest for help. The priest listened to her story and agreed to perform an exorcism on the house. He warned her that it would be dangerous, that the malevolent presence could lash out in unpredictable ways, but Sarah was determined to rid the house of the evil that had taken over. The night of the exorcism was a nightmare. The priest chanted and performed rituals, while Sarah and Michael huddled together in a corner, praying for the evil to be banished from the house. The malevolent presence fought back with a vengeance. Objects flew across the room, doors slammed shut, and the temperature dropped to freezing levels. But the priest persisted, and finally, after hours of intense battling, the malevolent presence seemed to weaken. And then it happened. As the priest finished the final chant, the malevolent presence let out a deafening roar that shook the very foundations of the house. The windows shattered, and the walls began to crack and crumble. Sarah and Michael clung to each other as they watched in horror as the house was consumed by the malevolent presence. In the end, there was nothing left but rubble and debris. The malevolent presence had been vanquished, but so too had the house. As Sarah and Michael stood outside, watching the ruins of their dream home burn to the ground, they realized that they had been foolish to think that they could conquer the malevolent presence that had taken over the house. They had underestimated its power, and now they had paid the ultimate price. They would never forget the terror they had experienced in that cursed house, and they knew that they would never be the same again. But they also knew that they had survived, and that was something to be grateful for. The couple moved on with their lives, but they never forgot the lessons they had learned in the house. They knew that evil could take many forms, and that sometimes the only way to defeat it was to walk away. They had learned the hard way that sometimes, there are forces in this world that are beyond our understanding, and that it's best to leave them be. As for the house, it remained abandoned, a warning to those who dared to venture too close. And as the years went by, people would tell tales of the malevolent presence that had once haunted the house, and the couple who had been foolish enough to think they could conquer it. But in the end, it was the house that had won, and it would forever be a reminder that some things are better left untouched.